Identity is the incredible invisible force that controls your whole life. It's invisible like gravity, but it controls every aspect of your life. He says the strongest force in human behavior is our need to stay consistent with how we define ourselves, for good or for bad. Welcome back to Case Studies. I have been looking forward to talking about this subject for a long time. It keeps coming up in so many different settings, both in church, in my family, in business, in mentorship conversations with my wife doing her MBA, and, lots of different thought leaders all converge on this same topic. And when I bring it up, it sounds simple, and it's actually the most profound out of almost any topic that I know of. And it's this topic of identity and the power of identity in shaping the behaviors of our life. And so I want to kind of set the tone with this with a personal story. When I got home from a church mission and was in Utah County going to school, and I had this scenario where I was transitioning from being a dependent, from being dependent on my mom and dad, to becoming independent and actually being able to take care of myself. And as I moved down to Utah County and I was trying to get jobs, I realized that I didn't have any valuable skill set that I could offer to the marketplace. And I was fighting for these low-level jobs with low pay, and that was my identity. My mindset was that, I was a college student, that I was a waiter. That's what I'd done at my previous job before I'd gone down there. And so that's where my behavior, that's where I was looking. I was looking to go get a job as a waiter because that paid more than an hourly job. And then I had this experience where I had a friend go out and sell door to door, and he made $100,000. And this is 20 years ago. And this was when I had never made $5,000 in my entire life. And this idea that this kid that I knew, that I respected a lot, he had all the character traits of somebody who was successful, but his outcomes were 20 times bigger than my best outcomes. And I just knew in my heart he wasn't 20 times better than me. But he had a mindset, or he had a mentality, or he had an identity that he saw himself different. And as I leaned in, I realized that, in sales, that I could go make more money. And so I went out that first summer, worked as hard as I could work, and I made $50,000. And that $50,000, it wasn't about the money. It was about this shift in my mindset, or this shift in my identity, that I was independent, that I was a top 1% salesperson, that I had the skill set or the ability to go create at any given time and go take care of myself. And that change in my identity, that upgrade in my identity, absolutely shaped me. And I remember diving deep into that topic. There's a book by Brian Tracy called The Psychology of Selling, and he uses different language for identity, but he calls it our self-perception, or the way that we see ourselves. And he basically states that we will perform in accordance to our self-perception, or I think his language is self-concept. And he gives examples of kind of mid-tier or upper-tier salespeople, that if somebody's a $30,000 a year individual and the year starts out and they're below that thermometer, that kind of internal thermostat, will crank on, and you'll go be more productive, you'll take more action, you do whatever you need to do to get up to that kind of $30,000 a year level, because that's kind of how you see yourself. That's who you are. But the opposite's true. If you come out of the gate and you're hot, a lot of times we'll self-sabotage, and we'll turn off the action, and we'll turn off the productivity, and we'll get lazier, because we are ahead of the way that we see ourselves. And so I want to go through a couple of quotes to shape this, and they're from different thought leaders from all around the world, but they're all kind of talking about the same thing. Jim Rohn, who's a personal hero of mine, he talks about developing your personal philosophy. and how having a personal philosophy will impact the way that you see your marriage, the way that you see your body, the way that you see your finances, and to really study success. And so as I'm crafting my personal philosophy, identity is so intertwined with that philosophy. So my personal religion, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the leader of this church is a guy named Russell M. Nilsson. And he turned 100 years old this year, which is insane to me. But he gave a talk recently where he was talking about this concept of identity or personal philosophy. And from a religious context, his 3 things that he said were most important for somebody that was a member of the church to have as their identity is, number 1, that you are a son or daughter of God, that influences behavior in a big way. Number 2, that you're a child of the covenant or you're a member of the church. Just knowing that, it changes what you do on a weekly and monthly and annual basis. There's responsibilities that come with being a member of the church. And then number 3, that you're a disciple of Christ. That those 3 things, if those are your identity, you're going to have a really productive relationship with God and with the church if you can kind of have those 3 things as being core. So bouncing around a little bit, Stephen Covey, or Tony Robbins, who's another one of my heroes. He's kind of on the top of that list of mentors that's influenced my life. He talks extensively about identity. And he says, if you change your story, you will change your life. Your story is tied to your identity. And he says, identity is the incredible invisible force that controls your whole life. It's invisible like gravity, but it controls every aspect of your life. He says the strongest force in human behavior is our need to stay consistent with how we define ourselves, for good or for bad. So we have these screwed up self-beliefs. We have these beliefs that we attach or that we sign up for at a young age, most of the time unconsciously, that don't serve us well. And we kind of carry this baggage, or we carry this screwed up software, and it limits our ability to go accomplish, what I think our potential is to accomplish. So I'll give you an example. So my wife, Chelsea, at a young age, had some teacher or some experience where she was communicated to that she was not smart. And she's one of the smartest people that I've ever met, but she's carried this self-limiting belief throughout her life, and it's limited her ability to go take action. And so over the last couple of years, she's really been working on herself and expanding her identity. And one of the things that she's done is she's gone back and she's doing her MBA at BYU. And the struggle and the wrestle that I've seen as she goes through this process of being bad at something and not knowing finance and not knowing accounting and not knowing coding and not knowing statistics and a lot of these quant type things that she just didn't study in her undergrad doing elementary education, and how these voices, kind of these self-limiting voices, continue to come back. But as she's jumped in and as she's got active and just gone with it, you can physically see her identity changing and her believing that I am smart and that I am enough. And it's so fun. And, all of us go through this process. The last one, anytime we sincerely want to influence change, the strongest way to do it is to raise your standards. And when we raise our standards, by default, we'll raise our identity. And so I want to go through some points that are kind of fundamentals around identity. Number 1, identity shapes our perception of ourself. Number 2, identity influences behavior. Number 3, identity is tied to our values. Number 4, identity creates belonging. We identify with different groups. I see this with my kids and their peer groups that they hang out with. But I also see it with myself. For the longest time, I did sales, and I identified with salespeople. And over the last 5 years, I've transitioned from sales and into private equity and finance. And I've identified myself as a professional investor. And all of a sudden, I associate with people that are in that world more consistently, where I never did before because I was a salesperson. I hung out with salespeople. I went to a course at Harvard Business School called Authentic Leadership. And there was this incredible professor, Steve Snook, that said there's cosmopolitan networks, and you hang out with kind of who you are. Athletes hang out with athletes, CEOs hang out with CEOs, church members hang out with church members. And so our identity, how we define ourselves, absolutely affects our behavior and who we hang out with. Number 5, identity affects relationships. If we're inclusive, and if we're kind, and if we're loving, and if we're accepting, and these are ways that we define ourselves, we have a way different tolerance for behavior than somebody that is prideful, or somebody that sees themselves as elite, that sees themselves as smarter than everybody else. And most of these, we haven't actually gone through and put the language to them to really articulate how we feel. So most of them are below the surface, but you can see them manifest in people's behaviors and in our own behaviors. Number 6, identity can be limiting or expanding. It's amazing how my dad, he just had this gift with us as kids. One of the biggest gifts that he gave us is he saw us so much bigger than we saw ourselves. Looking back now, I was a decent, above average athlete, but my dad had me believing that I was an All-American, that I was a professional athlete. And it was amazing how I performed at the high level of my potential a lot of times. And I think so much of this is I had a dad that helped shape my identity at a young age, that I was better than I was. And ultimately, I got way more results than if I would have had somebody influence me in the opposite direction, that I'm worse than I was. And so number 7, identity drives motivation. If we have high standards, we're way more motivated than low standards. I'm a procrastinator, or I'm a doer. I take massive action. The changes in language and those changes in how we see ourselves drives behavior. Identity is linked to purpose. Identity and narrative are intertwined. The stories that we tell ourselves are not our life. They're the stories of our life. And so it's so important to craft and hone and rewrite those stories that we tell ourselves, and make sure that they're productive and that they serve us well. We get one life to live, and ultimately we're responsible for the software that we're operating on, and that software is our identity. And then number 10, identity evolves over time. A couple of quotes finishing up, and then a little bit of action items that I do to help expand my identity. The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join that change. Alan Watts. And I think so many times when we're getting disrupted, or when we're going through changes, or when we're going through things that throw our identity, it's called an identity crisis. Like the very things that we believe get challenged, and we get paralyzed. And so by jumping in and leaning in and rolling with it and expanding with it and working with it, we end up crafting something that's better than what we had before. And the opposite's true. If we sit back and get paralyzed by it, it hinders our ability to move forward. And then the last quote that I wanted to share is by a guy named Oscar Wilde, and it says, "Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken." I think for me, I'm drawn to people who are authentic. I'm drawn to people who know who they are, and they're okay with it, and they're happy with it. And that takes personal work. And so I want to share a couple of strategies, or a couple of habits or rituals that I've done to get more comfortable in my own shoes, and to expand my identity, to make sure that that conversation that's happening between my ears on a subconscious level is a productive conversation that builds me and lifts me up and challenges me to work to go achieve the high end of my potential. And so number 1, on a daily basis, every single morning, I'll ask and answer the question of, who am I? And this practice started out with 10 or 15 or 20 answers to this question. And at this point, it's 60, 70, 80 answers to the same question. And it's amazing. It seems like the most simple, but I truly believe it's the most profound habit and ritual that I do on a daily basis. And the reason being is if I can get language to capture who I really am, that if Tony Robbins' statement is true, that the strongest force in the human personality is our need to stay consistent with how we define ourselves, then when I get off track, if I say that I'm kind and I'm unkind, then I will have a tinge in my heart. I will have something that will prompt me to go apologize and to be humble and go apologize and say, I'm sorry, that wasn't very kind, because that's who I am. I'm a kind person. And also, if I have high standards financially, that my efforts and energies and behavior will adapt to what those standards are. And so as I've gone through, for me, I've got language that captures how I define myself. So, just going through a couple of them: I'm courageous, I'm bold, I'm playful, I'm a force for good, I'm a force for God, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a founder, I'm joyful, I'm happy, I'm abundant, I'm absolutely certain. I have an unshakable financial foundation. And I can go through these, and I could go through 70 or 80 of these. And I could do it because I do it every single day. So I have this really productive language on how I define myself and really high standards for myself, not for others. I have high standards for others, my team, but I need to have the highest standards for myself. The leadership is communicating who you are, not what you say you are. The second habit or ritual that I think is so productive is if you can go take the time to list out the things that you're proud of, all of the things that you're proud of. If you go list out 100 life events that you're proud of, it gives you the confidence and it helps you craft and be aware of kind of who you really are. Those times when we're proud is when we act courageously. It's when we step up to the challenge, and all of us have them. We have them in sports, or we have them in family, or we have them in business, or we have them in a moment of crisis where we stepped up and did the right thing, where we worked hard, and those moments give us pride. But we're not very good at remembering. And so as we go through and we go deep, and we go all the way back to when we were young, and we document the story and the path of our life, and we articulate or write out our standards or our values and our identity, it allows us to build a strategy or build a plan for the future that's based off of really high standards. If you change your story, you'll change your life. And the quickest way to change your behavior is to raise your standards. And so to summarize, my proposal would be there's 6-7 categories that really matter in life. You've got your relationship with your spouse. You've got your relationship with God. You've got your physical health. You've got your career. You've got your finances. You've got your personal growth and your physical body. And when I go through those, having a top 1% standard in each one of those, and then finding language that defines what that looks like, and then finding mentors or finding people that encompass kind of the behaviors and the results that capture what you want in those standards. It's amazing how we move forward with such positive, abundant energy, and we're very productive moving forward if we've really kind of captured that foundation. And I would say 99% of people don't. The majority of people, they never actually take the time to articulate, this is who I am at my core. And so we operate just on software that's either given to us or we acquired over time, and that I would propose doesn't serve us very well. The habits or the results that we have that we like, it's because they're tied back to an identity and values that serve us well. And the opposite's true. When we have kind of tendencies or behaviors that we don't like, at some point they're tied back to identity and values. So anyway, thank you guys for listening in. This is a deep topic, and I'm just sharing my personal views. And so I want to, be very clear that these are Casey's views, that I'm not, saying how it is for everybody else, or I'm not telling anybody else kind of how to believe. But what I have been is a diligent student. I've spent 20 years studying the brightest minds and the greatest philosophers. And I've been diligent. I put in time on a daily and weekly basis to try to hone and tighten and improve my personal philosophy so that I can kind of have the highest standards and have the best, most accurate paradigm on what truth is and what principles are. And so hopefully I can operate off those principles to go kind of get and accomplish the outcomes in my life that I'm striving to go accomplish. And so the last thing, the way I'd sum it up, is we have one life to live. No one cares about your life as much as you do. And to go live the biggest and most beautiful life, I would say it's critical to really spend the time focusing on vetting out and tightening up the way that we define ourselves, our identity, and then making a commitment to continue to expand on that and improve on that and raise our standards. Thanks, guys.